The evening air was crisp as the sun began to set over the small town of Riverdale. The local gas station, with its flickering neon signs and worn-out pumps, stood as a familiar landmark for residents and travelers alike. It was a quiet Thursday evening when an incident occurred that would soon become the talk of the town. At pump number 3 stood a middle-aged man filling up his modest pickup truck. His weathered face and military-style haircut gave little indication of his past. He wore simple clothes, faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and boots that had seen better days. Nothing about his appearance suggested he was anything but an ordinary citizen going about his business. What people couldn't see were the memories that haunted him. The man, a retired Army Ranger who had served 3 tours overseas, had returned home 4 years ago after being wounded in combat. He had been awarded multiple decorations for bravery, including a Purple Heart, yet he rarely spoke about his experiences. He preferred the quiet life, avoiding confrontation and keeping to himself. As he replaced the gas pump nozzle, the rumble of motorcycles filled the air. 5 bikers, their machines gleaming under the station's lights, pulled into the lot. They were part of a small local group known for causing trouble in neighboring towns. Their leather vests displayed a patch that locals recognized with unease. The leader, a burly man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos, dismounted first. He scanned the area with narrowed eyes before noticing the veteran. Something about the quiet man's demeanor, perhaps the way he stood with natural confidence or how he observed his surroundings, seemed to irritate the biker. "Hey you," the biker called out, his voice carrying across the lot. "What are you looking at?" The veteran hadn't been staring. In fact, he'd barely glanced their way. He simply shook his head slightly and turned to walk toward the station's convenience store. This dismissal only aggravated the biker further. "I'm talking to you," he growled, stepping forward to block the veteran's path. The other 4 bikers spread out around them, creating a loose semicircle that trapped the veteran between them and the gas pump. Inside the store, the cashier noticed the situation developing. She reached for her phone, ready to call for help if needed. A few other customers inside watched nervously through the windows. "I don't want any trouble," the veteran said calmly, his voice steady despite the tension. "Just getting some gas and heading home." The biker leader laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Well, you found trouble anyway. This is our territory. There's a fee for using this station when we're around." It was a ridiculous claim. The gas station wasn't their property, but intimidation was their game. The veteran had faced far worse than this group of bullies, but he'd also learned when to fight and when to walk away. "Look, I've paid for my gas. I'm just going to pay for a coffee and be on my way," he said, attempting to step around the leader. The biker's hand shot out, shoving the veteran back against his truck. "Coffee costs extra when we're around," he sneered. His friends chuckled, moving in closer. Something shifted in the veteran's eyes then, a subtle change that would have warned anyone with real combat experience to back away. It wasn't anger so much as focus, a narrowing of attention that soldiers develop in dangerous situations. "Last chance," the veteran said quietly. "Let me pass, and we all go home without incident." The biker leader mistook the calmness for fear. He reached out to grab the veteran's shirt. "Or what, old man?" What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when witnesses described it, their accounts varied. The veteran moved with practiced precision. One moment he was standing still, the next, the biker leader was on his knees, arm twisted at an awkward angle, face contorted in pain and surprise. The veteran hadn't raised his voice or shown any sign of anger. He simply reacted with the training that had been drilled into him through years of military service, neutralized the threat with minimal force necessary. 2 of the other bikers moved to help their leader, but hesitated when they saw how efficiently he had been taken down. The veteran's eyes moved between them, calculating, ready. "He dislocated my shoulder," the leader howled, his bravado replaced by pain. No, the veteran corrected calmly. I could have, but I didn't. You can still move it, just hurts like hell. Now, we can all walk away from this, or things can get much worse. One of the bikers, younger than the rest and apparently with more to prove, reached toward his back pocket. The veteran noticed the movement immediately. I wouldn't, he warned. Whatever you're reaching for isn't worth what happens next. By now, several bystanders had gathered at a safe distance, some with phones recording. The cashier had called the local police, who were already on their way. The younger biker hesitated, then slowly brought his empty hand back into view. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone waited to see what would happen next. The veteran never took his eyes off the group as he slowly released the leader's arm. Make a smart choice, he told them. This isn't a fight you want. The biker leader struggled to his feet, nursing his arm and glaring at the veteran. His pride was wounded more than his body, but something in the veteran's steady gaze made him reconsider his options. Perhaps it was the absolute certainty that radiated from the man, or maybe a belated recognition of the disciplined way he moved. Who the hell are you? The leader demanded, trying to salvage some dignity. The veteran didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, someone who's seen enough fighting to last a lifetime. Someone who doesn't want to see anyone get hurt tonight, including you. In the distance, police sirens wailed, growing louder by the second. The bikers exchanged glances, clearly calculating their odds and options. This isn't over, the leader muttered, backing toward his motorcycle. It can be, the veteran replied. Your choice. The bikers mounted their machines as the first police car pulled into the lot, lights flashing. They revved their engines in a show of defiance before peeling out onto the main road. When the police officer approached, asking what had happened, several witnesses stepped forward, eager to describe how one man had stood his ground against 5 intimidating bikers. The veteran, however, simply said there had been a misunderstanding that got resolved. The officer, recognizing the veteran from around town, nodded slowly. They give you any real trouble? Nothing I couldn't handle, the veteran replied with a slight shrug. What none of them realized was that this encounter was just the beginning. The biker gang, embarrassed by what had happened, wouldn't let the matter drop so easily. And the quiet veteran, who had been trying to leave his combat days behind him, would soon find himself pulled back into a conflict he never wanted. As he finally entered the store to pay for his coffee, the veteran caught sight of his reflection in the glass door. For a brief moment, he saw not the civilian he'd been trying to become, but the soldier he'd once been, and perhaps still was underneath it all. The skills that had kept him alive in war zones had served him well tonight, but he knew that violence, once started, had a way of escalating beyond control. Little did he know that across town, the bikers were already planning their revenge, unaware of exactly who they were dealing with or the allies the veteran had in this small community. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test not only the veteran's combat skills but also his commitment to finding peace in civilian life. The gas station security cameras had captured everything, and by morning, the footage would spread throughout the town, turning the quiet veteran into a reluctant local hero and painting a target on his back for those who felt humiliated by his actions. As he drove home in the gathering darkness, the veteran felt a familiar tension returning to his shoulders, the vigilance that never quite leaves those who have lived through combat. He had chosen restraint tonight, but he wondered if that choice would be available next time. Because somehow, he knew there would be a next time. The news spread quickly through the small town of Riverdale. By the following morning, the gas station security footage had made its way onto local social media pages, showing how the quiet veteran had defended himself against the aggressive bikers. Opinions were divided, some praised his restraint, others worried about the potential fallout. The veteran, who preferred to stay out of the spotlight, was unaware of his new local celebrity status as he went about his morning routine. He lived in a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, surrounded by woods that provided the peace and quiet he cherished. After his military service, he had deliberately chosen this isolated spot to heal both physically and mentally. His simple morning ritual, coffee on the porch watching the sunrise, followed by a run through the forest trails, helped keep the nightmares at bay. Today, however, his thoughts kept returning to the previous night's encounter. Something about the look in the biker leader's eyes before they departed told him the matter wasn't settled. Meanwhile, across town in a rundown bar that served as the bikers' unofficial headquarters, the group was nursing both physical injuries and wounded pride. The leader, whose arms still ached from the veteran's defensive maneuver, pounded his fist on the table. "We can't let this stand," he growled. "No one makes us look weak and walks away." The youngest member, eager to prove himself, pulled out his phone. "I did some digging. Found out where he lives, that cabin up by Miller's Creek." The leader's eyes narrowed as a plan began forming in his mind. "Good. Tonight, we pay him a visit. Show him what happens when you mess with us." What they didn't know was that one of the bar's regular customers, a mailman who had served in the National Guard years ago, overheard their conversation. Recognizing the seriousness of their threats, he slipped out quietly and headed straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Thompson, a heavy-set man with 30 years of law enforcement experience, listened carefully to the mailman's account. He'd already viewed the gas station footage and recognized the veteran from community events, though they'd never spoken at length. "I appreciate you coming forward," the sheriff said, standing up from his desk. "I'll pay our friend a visit, warn him about what might be heading his way." As the sheriff's patrol car pulled up to the cabin later that morning, the veteran was splitting firewood in the yard. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, as the sheriff approached. "Nice place you've got here," Sheriff Thompson said, looking around appreciatively. "Peaceful." The veteran nodded, leaning his axe against the chopping block. "That's why I chose it." "About last night," the sheriff began, "that footage is all over town. You handled yourself well." "Just wanted to defuse the situation," the veteran replied simply. The sheriff nodded, then his expression grew serious. "Those bikers are planning something. Got word they know where you live and might be planning a visit tonight." The veteran's face remained impassive, but his eyes scanned the surrounding tree line with new attention. "Appreciate the heads up. I can station a deputy out here," the sheriff offered. The veteran shook his head. "No need to tie up your resources. I can handle myself." As the sheriff prepared to leave, he hesitated. "You know, folks around here respect a man who can defend himself without going overboard. This town could use someone with your experience." The veteran didn't respond directly, but something in the sheriff's words seemed to resonate with him. After the patrol car disappeared down the dirt road, he stood motionless for a long moment, looking at his peaceful sanctuary. Then, with deliberate movements, he walked toward the cabin. He had preparations to make. As dusk settled over the forest, the veteran moved methodically through his cabin, preparing for unwanted visitors. He wasn't arming himself with weapons, violence wasn't his goal. Instead, he was setting up a defensive perimeter that would give him early warning and strategic advantages. Motion-activated solar lights were strategically placed around the property. Fishing line with small bells was strung between trees at ankle height in several approaches to the cabin. Inside, he rearranged furniture to create clear pathways and remove potential obstacles. These weren't the actions of someone looking for a fight, but of someone who understood that preparation often prevented one. His military training had taught him to control the environment whenever possible. As he worked, memories surfaced of setting up similar perimeters in distant countries, though the stakes had been much higher then. He pushed those thoughts away, focusing on the present. By nightfall, he was ready. He sat on his porch in darkness, a cup of tea cooling beside him, listening to the forest sounds. He could distinguish between the natural noises of the woods and anything that didn't belong. Years of combat had honed this ability to a razor's edge. Around 10 o'clock, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines broke the night's stillness. The veteran remained seated, calm and alert. The sound grew louder, then suddenly cut off about half a mile down his access road. They were approaching on foot, smart, but not smart enough. Within minutes, the first bell jingled faintly in the darkness. The veteran smiled slightly. They had taken the most obvious approach path. A whispered curse followed the sound, then hushed voices arguing briefly before falling silent again. Meanwhile, Sheriff Thompson sat in his patrol car at the intersection of the main road and the veteran's long driveway. He had respected the man's wish to handle things himself, but his duty was to keep the peace. He wouldn't interfere unless necessary, but he would be close enough to respond quickly. Back at the cabin, the veteran remained motionless as the first of the motion sensor lights suddenly flooded the western approach with brightness. Two figures froze in the harsh illumination, the biker leader and one of his followers. The other three were likely circling to approach from different angles. "I know you're all out there," the veteran called calmly. "And I know why you've come. But there's something you should understand." He stood slowly, hands visible and empty. "I've spent years in places where every shadow might hide someone wanting to kill me. This little game you're playing? I've been on the receiving end of much worse from professionals." In the trees to his right, another light activated, catching two more bikers off guard. Only the youngest member remained hidden, though the veteran had already pinpointed his location from the subtle shifting of branches against the night sky. "Last night, I gave you a choice," the veteran continued. "I'm giving you another one now. Walk away, and we forget this happened. Or continue, and discover exactly what happens when you corner someone trained to respond to threats without hesitation." The biker leader stepped forward, trying to appear unfazed despite being caught in the spotlight. "You embarrassed us. Nobody does that without consequences." "I defended myself," the veteran corrected him. "There's a difference." The leader's hand moved toward his back, and the veteran tensed, ready to respond. But before either man could act, the sharp wail of a police siren cut through the night, followed by the flash of blue and red lights coming up the driveway. Sheriff Thompson's timing couldn't have been better. As his patrol car pulled into view, the veteran noticed the hidden young biker slipping away through the trees. The others, caught in the open, had nowhere to go. The confrontation that had been building toward violence was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would change the trajectory of lives in ways none of them could have anticipated. Sheriff Thompson stepped out of his patrol car, hand resting casually on his holster. His expression was stern but composed as he surveyed the scene, the veteran standing calmly on his porch, the bikers caught in the floodlights like deer on a highway. "Evening, gentlemen," the sheriff called out, his voice carrying authority without aggression. "Seems like you're a long way from town. Car trouble, perhaps?" The biker leader shifted uncomfortably, clearly calculating his options. His hand had moved away from his back at the sheriff's arrival, but tension radiated from his posture. "Just having a conversation with our friend here," he replied, gesturing toward the veteran. "At 10:30 at night? On private property?" The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting time for a social call." The veteran remained silent, watching the interaction unfold. He'd noticed that one of the bikers, the youngest, had managed to slip away unseen by the sheriff. That could be trouble later, but for now, the immediate threat was diminishing. "These men were just leaving," the veteran said finally, his voice level. "Weren't you?" The sheriff nodded slowly. "That sounds like a good idea. I'd be happy to escort you gentlemen back to town." For a moment, it seemed the biker leader might resist, might escalate the situation despite the odds now stacked against him. But something in the veteran's steady gaze, perhaps the absolute certainty that reflected there, finally penetrated his bravado. "This town's not big enough for the both of us," the leader muttered, trying to save face as he backed away. The veteran's response was unexpected. Actually, it is. I'm not your enemy unless you make me one. The sheriff gestured toward his patrol car. I'll follow you boys back to the main road. Make sure you get home safe. As the bikers retreated to their motorcycles, the sheriff approached the veteran's porch. You okay? He asked quietly. The veteran nodded. Fine. But one got away, the young one. Slipped through the trees when your siren started. I'll keep an eye out, Thompson promised. But I have to ask, how were you planning to handle this if I hadn't shown up? The veteran considered this for a moment. Depends on what they did. I wasn't looking for a fight, just making sure they understood that picking one would be a mistake. The sheriff studied him with newfound respect. You know, our town's deputy position has been vacant for months. No one seems to want the job in a place this small. Pays isn't great, but it comes with housing in town. The veteran looked surprised. You offering me a job? Just something to think about, Thompson replied with a shrug. Town could use someone with your particular skill set. And your restraint. After the sheriff left to escort the bikers away, the veteran sat back down on his porch, listening to the forest reclaim its natural rhythm. The encounter had awakened something he'd been trying to suppress, not the combat reflexes or tactical thinking, but the sense of purpose that came with protecting others. For years, he'd sought isolation as a form of healing. But perhaps true recovery meant reconnecting, finding a way to use his experiences for something positive in civilian life. The sheriff's offhand job offer lingered in his thoughts as he watched the moon rise above the trees. Unknown to him, the young biker who had escaped was watching from the darkness of the forest edge, his mind working on plans of his own, plans that would soon force the veteran to make decisions that would shape not just his future, but the future of the entire town. The following morning dawned clear and crisp. The veteran rose with the sun, his routine unchanged despite the previous night's confrontation. As he brewed his coffee, he found himself considering Sheriff Thompson's unexpected job offer more seriously than he'd anticipated. For nearly 4 years, he'd deliberately kept his distance from the town and its people. His cabin had been a sanctuary, a place to process the memories and experiences that civilians could never truly understand. But last night had shown him that complete isolation might not be the answer he'd been seeking. After finishing his morning run, he made a decision. He would drive into town, perhaps speak with the sheriff again about the deputy position. If nothing else, it would give him something productive to channel his training into. Meanwhile, across town at the local diner, Sheriff Thompson was having breakfast when his radio crackled to life. The gas station from the original confrontation had been vandalized overnight, windows broken, pumps damaged, and a crude threat spray-painted across the front wall. The sheriff arrived to find the station owner, a middle-aged woman named Riley, surveying the damage with hands on her hips and fury in her eyes. Those bikers did this, she stated flatly when she saw Thompson. They're sending a message. Thompson nodded grimly as he examined the graffiti. This is just the start. I've got security footage, Riley continued. It was the young one, wore a mask, but I'd recognize that walk anywhere. He came alone around 3 a.m. The sheriff jotted notes in his pad. We'll get him. But this escalation concerns me. They're not just targeting your veteran friend anymore. He's not my friend, Riley corrected. But he stood up to them when nobody else would. Now look what it's gotten me. Thompson was about to respond when a familiar pickup truck pulled into the lot. The veteran stepped out, his expression changing from casual to concerned as he took in the damaged station. Heard it on the scanner, he explained, approaching them. Thought I'd come see if I could help. Riley gave him an appraising look. Unless you've got glass repair skills I don't know about, not much you can do. Actually, the veteran replied, I worked construction before enlisting. I can handle basic repairs if you've got materials. This surprised both Riley and the sheriff. For the first time, they were seeing the man as more than just an ex-soldier with combat skills. He had a life, a history, abilities beyond what they'd assumed. While the sheriff reviewed the security footage, the veteran helped Riley board up the broken windows. As they worked, Riley's initial coolness toward him thawed slightly. "Why'd you really come today?" she asked bluntly. "Guilt?" The veteran secured another board before answering. "Partly. But mainly because in my experience, when bullies escalate, they don't stop unless someone makes them." "And you're volunteering for the job?" There was skepticism in her voice, but curiosity too. He shook his head. "I'm not looking for a fight. But I understand these types. They feed on fear and intimidation. The whole town's watching to see what happens next." Sheriff Thompson rejoined them, his expression serious. "Got a clear image of the kid. Name's Tyler, 19 years old, been in minor trouble before but nothing like this. We'll pick him up today." "And then what?" Riley asked. "His buddies will just cause more trouble." The veteran and sheriff exchanged a meaningful look. "Actually," the veteran said, "I've been thinking about your offer, Sheriff. Maybe it's time I stopped hiding in the woods." Something shifted in that moment, a decision made not from a desire for confrontation, but from recognition that sometimes standing aside caused more harm than engaging. The veteran, who had spent years trying to leave his warrior past behind, realized that perhaps he could use those skills differently now, not as a soldier, but as a protector. The small-town police station consisted of little more than a reception area, 2 desks, a single holding cell, and Sheriff Thompson's office. It wasn't much, but for Riverdale, it had always been enough. The veteran stood in the doorway of what would become his workspace if he accepted the job, taking in the modest surroundings. "It's not much compared to military facilities," Thompson acknowledged as he handed the veteran a coffee in a chipped mug. "But it serves its purpose." The veteran nodded, running his hand along the edge of the desk. "Sometimes simpler is better." Their conversation was interrupted by the radio crackling to life. The dispatcher, who also served as the town's receptionist and part-time librarian, reported that Tyler, the young biker, had been spotted at the local supermarket. "Want to ride along?" Thompson asked. "See what you'd be getting yourself into?" 20 minutes later, they pulled into the supermarket parking lot. Tyler was loading groceries into a beaten-up car, unaware of their approach until the sheriff's patrol vehicle parked behind him, blocking his exit. "Stay in the car for now," Thompson instructed the veteran. "Let me handle this first." The sheriff approached calmly, hands visible and posture non-threatening. "Tyler, we need to talk about what happened at the gas station last night." The young man froze, then glanced around as if looking for escape routes. Finding none, his expression hardened into defiance. "Don't know what you're talking about." "We have you on camera," Thompson replied evenly. "Vandalism, destruction of property, making threats. That's serious business, son." Tyler's eyes darted to the patrol car, widening when he spotted the veteran in the passenger seat. "This is harassment. You're just picking on me because of who I hang out with." When Thompson took a step closer, Tyler suddenly shoved his shopping cart toward the sheriff and bolted, sprinting toward the side of the building where a narrow alley led to the next street. The sheriff, caught off guard by the cart, stumbled. The veteran was already out of the car, assessing the situation in an instant. Instead of chasing directly after Tyler, he cut around the opposite side of the building, anticipating the young man's escape route. Tyler emerged from the alley at full sprint, looking back over his shoulder to see if the sheriff was following. He never saw the veteran until he practically ran into him. The veteran simply stepped into his path, planted his feet, and caught Tyler's arm as he tried to change direction, using the young man's momentum to guide him safely but firmly to the ground. "Easy now," the veteran said calmly as Tyler struggled beneath his grip. "You're just making things worse for yourself." The sheriff caught up moments later, breathing heavily. "Nice intercept," he commented as he pulled out his handcuffs. As Thompson read Tyler his rights, the young man glared at the veteran. "You think you're such a hero, don't you? But you don't know what you've started. The others won't let this go." The veteran met his gaze steadily. "I don't think I'm a hero. And I didn't start anything. But I am offering you some advice. The path you're on leads nowhere good. I've seen enough young men make bad choices to recognize when someone still has time to make better ones." Something in his words seemed to penetrate Tyler's anger. For just a moment, the defiance in his eyes wavered, replaced by uncertainty. Back at the station, after Tyler was processed and placed in the holding cell, the sheriff turned to the veteran. "So, what do you think? Still interested in the job?" The veteran looked through the window at the town's main street. People were going about their daily lives, most unaware of the quiet battles being fought to keep their peace intact. "Yes," he replied finally. "I think I am." What neither man knew was that the biker gang was already planning their retaliation for Tyler's arrest, and this time, they were calling in reinforcements from their larger affiliate club in the neighboring county. The next morning, the veteran arrived at the sheriff's office in his new tan uniform. It felt strange after years in either military fatigues or civilian clothes, but not entirely uncomfortable. Sheriff Thompson handed him his badge and a standard-issue sidearm, which the veteran holstered with practiced efficiency. "First order of business," Thompson said, spreading a map of the town across his desk, "is figuring out what our biker friends might do next." The veteran studied the map, his mind automatically identifying potential targets and vulnerabilities. They'll want something that makes a statement. After Tyler's arrest, they need to show they're not intimidated by law enforcement. That narrows it down to pretty much everything in town, Thompson replied dryly. Their planning session was interrupted when Riley from the gas station burst through the door, her face flushed with anger. "They're at it again," she announced without preamble. "Just got a call from my supplier. Apparently, someone threatened him, said if he delivers fuel to my station, his trucks will be targeted next." The veteran exchanged glances with Thompson. "Economic pressure," he observed. "Smart. Less risky than direct vandalism, but just as effective." "I can't stay in business without fuel deliveries," Riley said, frustration evident in her voice. The sheriff rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "We could escort the delivery trucks. And they'll just wait until we can't," the veteran countered. "We need to address the source of the problem." That afternoon, they convened an emergency town meeting at the community center. Nearly everyone in Riverdale showed up, including many who rarely participated in town affairs. The atmosphere was tense as Sheriff Thompson explained the situation. "These bikers are trying to create a climate of fear," he concluded. "They want us divided and afraid." An older man stood up from the back row. "Why not just give them what they want? Let that soldier boy leave town, and maybe they'll leave us alone." Several voices murmured in agreement, while others objected loudly. The veteran observed the division with concern but remained silent, understanding their fear. "That's exactly what they're counting on," Riley called out, surprising herself with her own vehemence. "Today it's about him. Tomorrow they'll want something else. Where does it end?" The debate grew heated until the veteran finally stepped forward. The room gradually fell silent as he approached the podium. "I understand your concerns," he began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "You didn't ask for this trouble. Neither did I. But I've seen what happens when good people back down from intimidation." He paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with several residents. "I'm not asking anyone to fight my battles. But this isn't about me anymore. It's about whether this town belongs to the people who live here, work here, and care about it, or to whoever is willing to use fear as a weapon." His words hung in the air. Then, from the middle of the crowd, an unexpected voice spoke up. It was Tyler's mother, a woman who had raised him alone after his father left years ago. "My son made poor choices," she said, her voice wavering but determined. "But he told me something after his arrest yesterday. He said that the biker gang has been recruiting young people from town, promising them protection and respect if they help establish territory here." This revelation sent a ripple of concern through the crowd. The threat suddenly felt more personal. These weren't just outsiders causing trouble, but a calculated attempt to establish a permanent presence in their community. As the meeting continued, something remarkable began to happen. One by one, townspeople started offering ways they could stand together. A network of communication was established, with residents agreeing to alert each other about suspicious activity. Local business owners committed to supporting each other if any were targeted. The veteran watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. This wasn't a military operation with himself as commander. It was a community finding its collective courage, something far more powerful than any single protector could provide. As the meeting dispersed, Sheriff Thompson clapped him on the shoulder. "Not bad for your first day on the job, Deputy." What they didn't notice was the solitary figure watching from across the street, taking careful note of who attended and who spoke up, information that would soon make its way back to the biker leader and his newly arrived reinforcements. The weekend arrived with an uneasy calm settling over Riverdale. For 3 days, there had been no sign of the bikers. No threats, no vandalism, nothing. Some townspeople had begun to hope that perhaps the show of unity had discouraged further trouble. The veteran, now settling into his role as deputy, knew better. This wasn't retreat, it was tactical patience. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for Riverdale's annual Founders' Day celebration. Despite the recent tensions, the town council had decided to proceed with the festival. Canceling would send the wrong message, they argued. The veteran had concerns but respected their decision, working with Sheriff Thompson to establish security protocols for the event. By noon, the town square was filled with families enjoying food stalls, games, and live music. Children ran between colorful booths while parents chatted with neighbors. For a few precious hours, the worry of recent days seemed to fade into the background. The veteran patrolled the perimeter, alert but approachable. Several townspeople stopped him to express their gratitude or simply to introduce themselves. After years of isolation, these small connections felt both strange and oddly healing. "You're good with people," Sheriff Thompson observed during a shift change. "Wouldn't have guessed that when I first met you." The veteran smiled slightly. "I led men and women in combat. Understanding people was part of the job." Mid-afternoon, just as the celebration reached its peak, they heard it, the distant rumble of motorcycles, growing steadily louder. The veteran tensed, hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before he caught himself. "Not here," he murmured to Thompson. They wouldn't risk confrontation with so many witnesses. But the motorcycles didn't approach the town square. Instead, the sound circled around toward the north end of town, where most of the emergency vehicles were parked during the festival. The realization hit both men simultaneously. "The station," Thompson said, already running toward their patrol car. They arrived to find the sheriff's office surrounded by motorcycles, at least 20 of them, far more than their local troublemakers alone. As Thompson had feared, they'd called in reinforcements from the larger affiliate club. The biker leader stood on the steps of the station, clearly waiting for them. Behind him, several of his crew were unloading jerry cans from their saddlebags. The message was clear enough. "This is as far as you go," the veteran said calmly as he and Thompson exited their vehicle, positioning themselves between the bikers and the building. The leader smirked. "2 of you against all of us? Not great odds." "Better than you think," came a voice from behind them. The veteran turned to see Riley from the gas station standing there, shotgun in hand. She wasn't alone. Behind her were at least 30 townspeople, shop owners, parents, even the elderly librarian wielding a walking stick like a weapon. The biker leader's confident expression faltered slightly. "This isn't your fight," he called to the crowd. "You made it our fight," Riley responded, stepping forward to stand beside the veteran. "When you threatened our town." More residents arrived by the minute, having heard about the confrontation through the communication network established at the town meeting. They formed a solid wall of determined faces, ordinary people who had found their collective courage. Among them, the veteran spotted Tyler's mother, and beside her, to everyone's surprise, was Tyler himself, recently released on bail. The young man looked uncertain, caught between his former associates and his community. The veteran met Tyler's eyes across the distance, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. Something passed between them in that moment, recognition, perhaps, of the power of choice. "Last chance," the veteran called to the bikers. "Leave Riverdale, and don't come back. This isn't a battle worth fighting." For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then, slowly, the biker leader surveyed the crowd of townspeople, seeming to truly see them for the first time, not as separate, vulnerable individuals, but as a united front. Without a word, he signaled to his crew. They remounted their bikes, engines roaring to life in angry protest, but the threat had dissipated. As they rode away, the message was clear: they might be dangerous, but even they recognized when they were outmatched. In the aftermath, surrounded by relieved and celebrating townspeople, the veteran felt something he hadn't experienced since before his military service, a sense of belonging, of having found his place. Not as a lone warrior, but as part of something larger than himself. Sheriff Thompson sidled up beside him, watching the departing bikers. "Not how I thought this would end," he admitted. "It's not really an ending," the veteran replied, looking around at the gathered community. "More like a beginning." And as the sun set over Riverdale that evening, casting long shadows across the town square where the celebration continued with renewed spirit, the former war hero who had once sought solitude found himself at peace among people who had become not just neighbors, but something closer to family.